Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, The Spiritualist. My name is Rebecca Meisel. If this is your first time joining me, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. This podcast is when I share some of my personal experiences and insights into my spirituality and that journey, and share any tips and tricks that I've learned throughout the years. I've spent a lot of time digging deep into the spiritual path and really cultivating a lot of knowledge and education surrounding these topics. But my most favorite is to share my personal experiences because I feel like when you touch base on your authentic truth and you're able to share that with others, it really has this difference. It's not just knowledge from a screen, it is felt, it is honored, it is your personal truth. So, in that spirit of things, I really wanted to continue these updates and these chats, these solo podcasts to kind of put myself out there and share a few of the things that I have been thinking about and moving through lately. So, one of these big things that has been coming up recently is this ability to surrender to the flow of the universe and the flow of your life. I feel like this is something that's really been coming up strongly for a lot of us as we start embarking on these new chapters in our lives. A lot of us are feeling the sense of new beginnings, the sense of something new coming in, something big is shifting and changing. And a lot of us who've been doing this spiritual work for quite some time might be especially noticing this big upgrade or big purge that we've had to undergo recently, especially with this eclipse coming up, especially with the past Mercury retrograde and those energies. There's been a really big focus on that. Like, what do we need to remove and let go that's long expired for us to really propel forward? And to really believe in ourselves. So, this theme of like confidence and surrendering to the unknown has been really crucial. And the big word that comes here is trust. This is something that a lot of times we fail to think about when it comes to pursuing our dreams. A lot of times we can be in this very masculine energy where it's like we've got to forge the path. We've got to be doing all the work. We've got to do the heavy lifting, and we forget that there is so much help available and there's so much that's going on behind the scenes sometimes that we're not even partial to because our guides are doing everything they can to align us with our highest path and with our authentic truth and what's going to bring us into more light and what's going to help us learn the vital lessons we need to learn. So sometimes what can really happen is we can get in our own way by trying to muscle through things and force things before they're ready, before their time. And we fail to remember that if we just trust the process, things are going to work out anyway. And anyway, it's been something I've been really reflecting on, because I've been recently getting a lot of Reiki trainings and I've been teaching a lot of Reiki trainings with some wonderful new clients. And it's been so beautiful. And it's always such an amazing reminder to me of when I started. When I'm working with these newbies and people who are just starting their spiritual path or just beginning their Reiki journey, as an example, it always is so exciting. And I love working with beginners because it's just like they don't even know how powerful they are and how amazing they are and what they're capable of. And a lot of times I see this like low confidence, right? Because it's like, can I really do this? And am I going to do it right? And it just puts me right back into the beginning of my journey and how I felt. And so today I kind of had that research and I was like, you know what? I feel like I need to make a podcast about this because it's just so helpful to share some of these details of when I first started and what that process really looked like and how the universe has shown me how trust can bring some of the most fruitful results in your life. And let me tell you, I've had to take a lot of leaps of faith in my journey. One of the biggest ones was to leave behind my religion, my religious upbringing, the only way of life I knew to explore the unknown, to explore what life could look like outside of that small community, and really rebuild my own beliefs and values for myself personally. And that was huge. Like, I have to admit, a lot of people have said, well, that's so brave. Like, how did you do that? I just did it. And sometimes they're like, I'm like, I don't feel like I was brave because you don't really think that way when you're in that situation. All you really think about is how you need a change, how something needs to happen. And if nothing is happening, then you've got to make it happen. And that was what was so interesting is at the beginning point of those stages of wanting to reframe my life, the universe kind of like lined it up for me. And it was almost like too good to be true. And I'm not sure if I've ever shared this on even my old podcast, but before I ever left my really closed community, I decided to move. I decided to, you know what? I didn't even decide. That's the funny thing. I was just kind of thinking about it. I was like, well, you know what? I feel like I need a change. And I feel like my community here can't give me fulfillment, can't give me the connections I know I need and am craving for. And I just felt called to explore other areas. And so I did. And I wasn't even serious. Like, I was just kind of like, I'm just looking, I'm not sure if this is the right place. So I visited this one area in a different province from me. And I still wasn't 100% on it. But then when I got home, I got like inundated with all these opportunities that were just like in that place. It was like in 2 days' time, I had the perfect basement suite right on a vineyard, right in this gorgeous community, right in my budget. Like, I mean, exact budget. I had a job opportunity that came forward, and I didn't even have the job yet. But I was like, you know what? It's all aligning. I got to go. And so I just took the leap of faith. And that was one of the best decisions of my life because the universe made it happen. And when I was in that space, when I was finally able to be away from the influences that were making me stay small, and I was able to finally just think for myself and finally feel into who I was as an individual without that community, without, anything else. That's what allowed me to finally see myself and see into my soul and see what I really wanted to do with my life and acknowledge the parts that just weren't working for me, the belief systems that were not working for me. And that changed my life. But it had to happen that way. And I've always kind of shake my head in shock of how that all happened because it was like everything aligned so perfectly for me to do that, to get to where I needed to be, to have that spiritual awakening, to have that transformation happen. So that is just one event where I feel like the universe really orchestrated things in my life that I wasn't expecting. All I knew is I'd been putting it out for a very long time. I need a change. I need something different. I need to be able to get out of this. And it was like, boom, everything aligned. It didn't mean I needed to take action, but it really was divine timing. It really was this big catalyst for growth. And it is what propelled my spiritual expansion. And then from there, I've had other big moments where things have seemed so seemingly perfectly orchestrated. Like meeting my partner was just an unbelievable experience as well. And for those of you who haven't read my book or are familiar with that story, I'll just briefly go into it. But essentially, I had known his father for 2 years before I even met him. And he had been a customer of mine at a store I worked at for, I guess it was over 3 years. And I had moved and come back, and I got a job again at that same store. This older gentleman was my first customer almost every day. And we had kind of struck this like unlikely friendship. And I'd never asked about his kids before. I didn't really know much about his family because we always talked, believe it or not, about kind of more spiritual, metaphysical topics, herbs, because that's the industry I was in, was herbalism and all of that. And so anyway, then one day he brought his son to meet me, and it was like love at first sight. And then we just connected. And it was so bizarre because I didn't even know that he existed and he had been there that whole time. and so it was really crazy how the universe once more orchestrated so much. And what was funny is his father had said to me, well, I had been conducting like a 2-year interview with you to see how it would work between me and his son, right? And we kind of laugh at that because it's like, wow, it's just so weird how that happened. So there was so many incidences that have happened in my life that have really made me a believer that when you trust the flow, when you trust the universe, it's going to bring you those things, those changes that maybe you never thought were possible. And it's going to bring them to you right when you need them. And when we just trust the flow of our lives, things work out. And how often is that true? Because a lot of times when we're going through challenge and we're going through things, and maybe we're just really going through it in general, it can be so hard to see what's around the corner. And if we don't have that insight, it can feel really, really negative. It can feel really sad. It can make us feel like we're stuck, but you're never stuck. And that's the truth. You're just in this space to purge what's necessary to purge before you level up, before you go to this next place. And the universe is always preparing you. And that's what's so cool. It's like, could this actually be a moment where I am being prepared for what I asked for? And maybe it is necessary for me to face this challenge so I can get rid of the thoughts, the beliefs, the negativity, whatever is standing in my way of gaining this dream that I've asked for, this aligned path that I'm trying to walk. So that's something I've really learned along the journey is when we are manifesting, sometimes we get opposite things happen that we don't want that actually are the catalyst to bring us forward to what we do want, to what we do need. And these things are crucial for us to experience so we can really grab hold of that dream. So, surrendering to the universe is so important and trusting there is always a plan for your life. And another side of this is recognizing all the trauma that we've been called to release, because how many of us as souls, and especially light workers, a lot of us have come to the earth to release a lot of ancestral wounds. A lot of us have come to earth to release past life karma, things that have really gone on for too long. These cycles that your soul was like, you know what? I'm going to volunteer and I'm going to go to this family. I'm going to go into this lifetime and I'm going to work through this stuff so we can heal this for good, so we can bring more of this love to the planet and to the universe. And so many of us are being stripped of this right now. And they're actually showing me that, like, stripped. It's got to be stripped away because it was so interconnected with us, these traumas, these cycles. So maybe you've been noticing that lately. Maybe you're like, wow, I've been trying to pursue my dreams, but man, all this stuff keeps coming up and these cycles are repeating. Maybe it's with money, maybe it's with family drama, maybe it's within these relationships. But I just keep seeing like these cycles need to be cleared. They need to be cleared out. So just notice, if you've been going through it lately, if you're like, I just can't make it yet, I'm just not there yet. What if this is deeper than you really realize? And that's something that has been very true for me personally is once I started getting that knowledge and going back and meditating and being shown some of these lives that my soul has experienced, or seeing the trauma that was actually carried through from my generations through to me, was unreal. I was like, oh my gosh, that's why I feel this way, or that's why this is so magnified, or why I have such a strange fear of this. And it's been really interesting to see the interconnectedness of these traumas and how my soul volunteered to clear them. And so sometimes these things happen because they are part of your soul contract. So no matter what, we're going to have a human experience. And I think that's part of the ride. We have to just surrender when times get tough, when things happen. We have two choices. We can resist it, we can fear it, we can feel victim to it, or we can take control and heal the thing. And that's our choice. And so, once more, your soul volunteered, but you have free will. You can choose to heal this, or you can choose to not heal it. But no matter what, we have to surrender because the universe has our highest good in mind. And sometimes it is best for us not to know. Sometimes we only get the information that we need to heal something. So once more, I feel like these things are important to share because if you're kind of in this transient energy, or you're not sure of where you're going, or you're not feeling confident in yourself, these are things to remember, like, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to have that information right now. If it's not here, then there's a reason for it. Or maybe I am experiencing this issue so I can heal it. And we have to trust our ability, like that's pretty amazing that your soul is that strong. It is that powerful. And when you're going through big challenge, remember that. Like, wow, okay, this is a really big challenge, which means my soul is that much bigger. My soul can handle this because it chose this. So this is what's so amazing is we're opening up our perspectives to challenge, to struggle, and we're reframing how we look at it. Because once more, we have the choice to suffer through it, or we can move through it with love, with grace, with a greater understanding of what that challenge is. So, the next side of this is the confidence. And I really want to talk about that. When I first started my journey, and full circle back, sorry. But going back to my Reiki journey, when I first started Reiki, that was a big catalyst for me. Reiki was what opened up a lot of my spiritual gifts that I had been avoiding or not aware of. And it was like, that upgrade in my energies was so fantastic that it was like a whole new world opened for me. So Reiki was one of the biggest things that changed my life. And I really mean that. It was what I needed in my journey. And what's so interesting about Reiki is it's one of the best things, personally. Like when I look back at it now, I'm like, wow, that was literally the best choice because it forced me to trust. It forced me to really become intuitive and develop my intuitive promptings and trust my intuitive promptings, because that essentially is what Reiki requires you to do, is surrender and trust to the flow. So if you are new to Reiki, if you've never heard about Reiki, Reiki is when an individual channels life force energy to another individual. So you essentially are the vessel for the healing energy to move through to another. So you yourself are not conducting the energy session. You yourself are not really involved other than being the vessel, the conduit. And it's such a healing and beautiful experience because the universe itself is doing the work. It's doing the healing. So you as this channel or this vessel for the universe, for this energy, you really don't have to be in there doing the frontline work. So, in essence, this work should be the easiest thing in the world. And what's so funny is a lot of times it's human nature. We overcomplicate it. We make it into a big thing like, oh my gosh, am I doing it right? Can I do it? And this was a fear that I had in the beginning was like, oh my goodness, you learn certain hand poses, you learn how to do a session, you learn the code of ethics, all these things that are very vital and important. But sometimes we forget where that line is of rule following and putting ourselves into the session and our ego into the session as opposed to just surrendering and knowing when to let go and trust the universe, even if it prompts you to do something that's out of the norm. So this started happening to me very early on. I was given this very straightforward, this is how you do it. And I was finding I'd tune in and I'm like, oh, but I'm being directed to do this. And that used to bring a lot of confusion because it was like, well, am I doing something wrong? Is this wrong for me to do it this way? Or should I be like just following the hand positions? Because what happens a lot of times with Reiki, well, 100% of the time with Reiki, is your hands are going to be guided to where they need to be. So, one of the biggest points that I always stress when I'm doing a Reiki training with someone, if I'm teaching them how to do this, it's like, okay, I'm going to show you the hand positions, but this is not a hard and fast rule. If your guides tell you, if all of a sudden you start a session and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go to their heart, then you go to their heart. You listen to your intuitive promptings because at the beginning of every session, we set the intention to surrender, to let the universe guide our hands to where they need to be. So it's quite a beautiful experience, but it requires you to fully let go. So you have to flow with it. You can't predict what's going to happen. Every session is different. And when I first started, I was actually getting a lot of intuitive messages and prompts and different sensations. And those were other ways that I was receiving intuition. And I didn't really realize that that was separate from Reiki. I had thought that that was all in one. And it shocked me when I found out that other practitioners were just doing energy work with no intuitive messaging. And I thought that was so shocking. I was like, oh, I just thought everybody did it. But not necessarily. So I had from the get-go started doing sessions a little differently. And how I did that was by trusting. If I started a session, I had to learn that I was no longer in charge. I didn't have to worry about what I was doing in the sense of, do I put my hands here? Do I put my hands there? It was like the universe would direct me, the universe would show me the way. And so I found Reiki to be such an amazing catalyst for me to start learning how to fully trust the universe above all else, above human rule, above my own ego and my own fear, and most importantly, my own low confidence. Because one of the biggest things I struggled with, especially in the beginning, was believing in myself, was trusting that what I was getting was correct without second guessing it all the time. So it actually took me a full year to start working on people in person because I was so shy. I was so worried that if I was face to face with someone that I would say something wrong, I would do something wrong. So for a full year, I only did distance sessions because I felt more comfortable just being by myself and I could just be in the energy without worrying about another person there. And but it really taught me how to trust intuition because once more, I would always offer sessions with channeling, with messages. I just couldn't do a session without them. It was like, even if I tried, it was like I would get so much because when you're in someone's energy and you're channeling that energy, you access that. It releases the chakras. So a lot of times you're gonna get emotion, you're gonna get insights into what's going on. And then their guides come in, so I was finding spirit was coming in. I was finding spirit guides were coming in. And I'd be like, oh, hello. And I'd just be like, okay, guess they're joining in. And so it just flowed very naturally. And it was so funny because prior to these sessions, I would be so nervous. I would be so anxious. I'd have to do my self Reiki first just to calm myself down to be able to do a session because I was so self conscious and so worried. But every time I did a session, it just taught me there was nothing to worry about at all. It wasn't up to me. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was learn how to listen. All I had to do was trust. And everything that that person could need was going to be provided because it wasn't about me. It was about them. It was about them getting what they needed. And it was so loving and so beautiful. I really started to realize there was nothing to worry about. And I really started to see that when I was doing these sessions and I was in there, it was the easiest thing in the world. It's just our own minds that get in the way. It's just our own egos that make us feel like we're incapable or we can't or we have to do it this way. We can be so small minded and so stubborn in our ways. But that doesn't mean that there's not other ways, that there's not better ways. And sometimes we have to be humble enough to surrender when the universe says surrender. And once more, this may not always make logical sense. So an example of this is I was doing a session one day for a lady and I was still fairly new. I still wasn't fully on board with my gifts. I wasn't fully trusting them. And I kept getting like multiple spirits that were coming through. And this is something that happened quite often. And it would confuse me because I didn't understand I could put boundaries in with spirit. I didn't understand that I could have more control. And so what would happen is spirit tends to be very invasive for me anyway. So when they come in, it's like, oh my God, we can talk. And it's like they get so excited that they can overwhelm me. And so what had happened is I had probably about 3 or 4 separate spirits that had come in for this lady all at one time. So I was actually getting numerous messages and I couldn't decipher who was who. I couldn't decipher who had said what. And I just was like, I was so confused. I was thinking it was just one spirit. I didn't know I was speaking to multiple different individuals because they were just showing me like symbols and they were just showing me like, and then channeling words at the time. So I was just writing down messages and writing down symbols I saw. And once again, I was very new. So I didn't have a lot of experience and know how to, that I could just say, hey, slow down, one at a time, please. And like have actual rules. I didn't know I could do that. So I did this little session. And one of the messages that I got, well, I got a few. So one of the things I kept seeing was like Star Wars figurines and Star Wars symbols and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, somebody here was about Star Wars, like loved Star Wars. So I was like writing that down. And then I heard this voice that said, I love you, my little Wookiee. And if you're familiar with Star Wars, it's like that's a Star Wars character. And so I was like, okay, this is funny. And I was like, oh my God, what if this doesn't resonate with her at all? And I was so scared. So I was like, here I'm going to go and be like, you know what a Wookiee is? I hope you know Star Wars because like she's going to think I'm absolutely crazy. And so that was when I was like terrified to actually tell her the messages. And anyway, followed through. I was like, well, I'm just going to trust. I'm just going to tell her this is what I got. And yeah, it turned out that she had a friend who passed who was really into Star Wars, but she was really stumped on the wording, I love you, my little Wookie. And she's like, that doesn't really resonate. And I was like, oh my God, it doesn't resonate. And I had like my mini heart attack. I was like, well, and so we kept talking. And then she's like, oh, she's like, could it be my little cookie? And I was like, could be. I was like, maybe I just heard Wookie and maybe it was actually Cookie. She's like, Cookie would make sense because her aunt used to call her her little Cookie. I was like, oh my Lord. So it was really funny because that was one I often think about because it was such a great example of to me of like, I wasn't trusting. And I had that moment of doubt of like, oh man, I was wrong. I didn't get something right. It didn't resonate. And I was so like shocked and scared and didn't want to tell her what I got. But when I did tell her, it did resonate. And she was able to get those heartwarming confirmations that her friend and her aunt were on the other side and they were there for her. So it ended up being a really beautiful experience, even though it temporarily knocked my confidence. But it really taught me to keep sharing because what if the gift that you're here to share could change someone's life? What if the gift you do want to pursue could make a difference, even to just one person? And sometimes we need to remember that. Even when there's people that doubt us, that make us feel like we're not enough or question our ability, that doesn't mean that we need to question ourselves. And this is where it's so important for us to trust what we receive and to trust that our desires, our hopes, our dreams are in fact placed in us to follow through in. And once more, this is what's kept my hope alive. And this is what kept me going because I knew in the depths of my soul, I was meant to do something more. And I knew after years of feeling suppressed and not enough and not good that I would prove everyone wrong. And it wasn't out of spite, it was more like, that's what I deserved after all those years of staying small and never having a voice. I needed to do this for myself. I needed to follow my passions because I would be damned if I wasn't going to live my life now. I felt like I'd put my life on hold for so long that for me to live a life of freedom, the life that I have now, seemed totally unfathomable to me in the past. I would have never guessed that this is where I would be, but it is absolutely the place I need to be. And the only reason I'm here is because I trusted the universe and I trusted that calling inside myself. And I feel like I need to share this because you all have a calling. If you're listening to this, if you're interested in your spirituality, if you're feeling that inside yourself, that's a calling, my friend. And you got to stop ignoring it. You got to follow through in your calling. This is your soul speaking through you, that inkling, that nudge, those little thoughts that spark up in your mind and your imagination, those are real. Those are ways your guides in the universe speak to you. So, are you listening? And can you trust that even if it goes against the grain, it is exactly what's right for you to do? So, once again, things when you first receive it might seem crazy. It might seem illogical, just like that message. Like, oh my God, I'm going to tell her, like, little Wookie, that makes no sense to me. But it could mean something so good for them. And it did. So, don't hold back. And that's what I just keep wanting to say is like, don't hold back. Even if there's things that seem to get in the way, things that life brings, life does happen, but it doesn't mean to stop, doesn't mean to slow down in what you're wanting to pursue and who you want to be in this world. You got to be who you want to be. This is your life. Don't waste it. So I just feel called like to talk about that, to really trust your journey and trust Everything is happening for a reason, and to not doubt yourself, because if I had quit then when I had some self doubt, or if I quit when people did distrust me or not believe me or get second guess me, then I wouldn't be living my happy life. I wouldn't be in charge of where I am now. I would still be a victim to other people's stories about me. And I just don't want to live my life that way. I want to be able to live my life for me and not anybody else. So I really feel like that is so important to share today. And for some reason, hopefully, I'm sharing this for a reason. Hopefully, it resonates for some of you if you are embarking on a new spiritual path, even if you are a seasoned warrior on the spiritual path. We all have those moments of doubt, of not sure if we can go forward, if we can traverse the uncertainty ahead of us. But you were absolutely meant for what you were meant for. And I know that sounds funny, but it's true. Anything that's meant to be yours is going to be yours. You don't need to worry about it. You don't need to be chasing it. You don't need to be constantly worried about it. It's here, it's coming, it's there for a reason. So trust the reason in that. So from there, I feel really called to talk about just sharing your gifts, So many of us hesitate in that. So many of us worry, like, will I be accepted? Will I be able to do this? Yes, you can. What's the worst that can happen if you start to trust yourself? What's the worst that could happen if you just start trusting the universe? And to know if the universe has placed this in your path, it's also for a reason. One story I'll share as well is when I was first interested in Reiki, I ended up going to a ladies training, and it wasn't actually a Reiki training. It was more like she was going to talk about the chakras, and then she was going to do a little bit of energy work after the class on each of the participants. And so it was a friend of a friend's, and I was like, you know what, I'll go because I'm kind of curious, but I'm not 100% sure on this yet. And I thought it'd be a great way for me to try Reiki without, fully going into it because I was still very scared of it at the time. And so I was like, well, we'll see how this goes. So I went and I felt very intuitively to go. I was like, okay, I really feel like I need to do this. I need to go. And it ended up being a negative experience. It didn't end up being the experience I hoped for. And yeah, that's all I can really say. And it just wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the knowledge that I had been thirsting for. It was a bit of a letdown. And I don't mean that in any disrespectful way. She was new, she's trying to figure out her footing and all of that. But for me, I was hoping to get some enlightenment, to get some energy work, and to start feeling that calling there. And once more, I was like, well, why was I so led there? Like, why did I go? I felt like I really needed to go to that. But the whole purpose was to show me what wasn't in alignment for me, what wasn't the path for me, and how I didn't want to pursue my spiritual journey. And so even that held a lot of enlightenment through a more disappointing experience. So sometimes we're going to have those too, and our intuition is going to lead us, and we're going to go, oh, why did my guides lead me to this? Like, why did I have to experience that? That was awful. Well, did you learn something from it? Was there something that really showed you something else that brought truth to you? Then that was why you needed this truth of understanding who you are better, what you do like, what you do want from this experience, and to not compromise in it, right? So sometimes we can have those experiences as well. So, yes, the universe sometimes will give you negative experiences, but sometimes those are the best catalysts for our growth. Another little story I'll share too, and I have this in my book, was when I had my first ever mediumship session. And for some reason, mediumship was always the hardest one for me. I was very nervous about it because it does require a lot of trust, and it does require you to trust what you're getting, you know? And once more, I was so scared of that. I was so scared I was going to give someone a message they didn't understand or was unclear, because once more, I was still kind of learning how to navigate these spirits that were coming in, and sometimes their messages were very confusing for me. And I was also worried that I wouldn't be able to tune into the spirit the person wanted me to tune into, because sometimes that happens, right? It's all about who steps forward from the other side. And so I was incredibly nervous. And I had done a bit of mediumship prior for people, but it was always accompanied with other stuff like energy work and channeling. And so I hadn't done like a one-on-one, face-to-face, just mediumship session. And that scared the pants off of me. I was so scared. So I had this, my Reiki teacher at the time, she said she had this client who likes to do sessions and that she thought we would be a good match. So I was like, okay, great. So I had no idea who this person was. I'd never talked with them personally before. And so we hopped on the call, and immediately I felt a very low energy. And that's okay. You know, obviously she was having some mourning that was happening. She had lost her daughter a few years prior, and it was the day of her death. So it was a very emotional day. And so there was a lot of heaviness to begin with, and that's totally fine. But what I wasn't expecting was her lack of belief. So when I kind of thought if you booked a mediumship session, you would kind of be a believer. And I had thought this lady was, because she had booked lots of multiple sessions with multiple mediums before me. So I was like, okay, like, and the first thing I kept getting was like, she doesn't believe in you. And I was like, oh, shite. Like, that was the first thing I kept getting. And I pulled her card, and I was like, well, let's start the session with a card and start this off on hopefully a good note. So I pull her card, and it was the confidence card. And it was all about trusting and receiving the messages and trusting the messages that come through. And I was like, oh no, she doesn't believe me at all. I'm like, how does this happen? Of course, my first mediumship session is someone who I feel like I have to convince. And immediately that made me feel so anxious and so nervous, because I didn't want to convince someone. I've never wanted to be that person where it's like, I have to convince you to believe it. It's like, if you don't, that's fine, but I can only share what I get. And anyway, so I did the session, and it turned out her daughter came through, and that worked out well. Um, but I felt extremely on edge that entire time. I felt very nervous. I felt very unsettled because I felt like I was being very judged the entire session. And she did admit that she wasn't sure if she believed in mediums. She wasn't sure if she believed all the stuff she was getting. And so, of course, for me, it knocked my confidence greatly, and it made me feel very challenged. So at the end of the session, I had hoped that I'd given her some comfort. But I walked away from my first ever mediumship session feeling really shitty. In full transparency, I closed my laptop, and I just remember I cried. I cried, and I cried really hard. I to have somebody, it just felt like my confidence was just totally torn. And I was like, I don't know if she even believed in me. I don't know if I did a good job. I don't know. I ripped myself limb from limb, and I really battled with confidence at that time. And but what was really beautiful, and I share this experience in my book as well, is in that moment of complete vulnerability, I felt this amazing energy at my side. beside me. And I kid you not, it was one of the most unbelievable experiences I had at the time. And I could feel this energy on my left, and it walked around me, and it faced me, and it kissed me. And I felt my entire mouth, my lips tingle, like with energy. And I was like totally shocked. I was like, what on earth is happening? I don't know if have shared this on my podcast before. I might have. Um, but it was like really shocking to me. And I was like, did that just like happen? Did I just get kissed? Like, this is the most bizarre thing. And I remember it like just rocked me to my core. I was so shocked. Um, and I just kept getting this overwhelming feeling of support and love, and that I had done the right thing, that I had done my best. And oh, it makes me emotional. But it was so special. And later down the road, I found out who it was. I found out it was actually my guardian angel, who is actually my grandfather, who has reincarnated into an angel. And oh my gosh, it was just so funny because what hit the nail on the head for me was the kiss, because apparently my grandfather, he would kiss all the young kids. He'd kiss them like a sweet little kiss. And he was like a Newfie, right? So Newfoundlanders are known to be so loving and gregarious. And I guess that's how he was. He loved to kiss all the grandkids and make them feel loved. And so I found that out. And it was so comforting when I found out his identity. And I was like, wow, this is truly so special. And so since that, I've been able to connect with him multiple times, and it's so beautiful. He always makes me feel like the most loved thing in the world. And it's so important to remind people of that, because you have a guide just like that too. You have a guardian angel, you have multiple spirits and your spirit team, your angels, your spirit guides, all of them love you like that and are supporting you like that. So even when you feel like you're not good enough, or you haven't been successful in the way you feel like you should be, if people doubt you, even if people ridicule you, you realize in the end it doesn't even matter, because you're doing what you're meant to be doing. You're doing what is in your heart and in your soul. Oh, man, that makes me emotional. But every time I talk about that moment, it makes me want to cry because it was just so powerful. And that's how we're all loved, my friends. We're all loved so, so much. And to know that when you're pursuing your gifts, you're going to have moments of doubt. You're going to have moments that make you feel like, can you even do it? You question yourself. But this is the support that's available to you. You're never alone in this, and to not give up. And I'm so glad I didn't. That one was a hard one for me to get over, but I did, because I started realizing that what a waste it would be if I didn't share messages that I was getting for people, that if I didn't share the stuff that I was receiving. I just know if one person had done that for me, that would have changed my life. So how could I hold back? you know? And that's something I think we all need to remember. When we hold back our gifts, we're not just hurting ourselves, we're hurting others that we should be helping. We're hurting the universe. We're not allowing ourselves to do the service we're here to do. And how many people could benefit from what you have to offer? You know, think about that for a bit. Like, how many people's lives can you change by just being yourself, by following your authentic path, by believing that you are enough and you are good enough? And also realizing, like, who cares if you're not the best in the world? Who cares if you don't have a big social media following? What matters is the people who do see you, the people who do value you and love you. And to know that you can love yourself enough to do this for yourself. So your dreams, your gifts are not just for you. They could change so many lives. And I feel like that's so important to remember. Even if it's something you feel is insignificant, if you're like, well, all I really want to do is paint. Well, oh my gosh, art is needed here. Music is needed here. If you're like, oh my gosh, only 5 people showed up to my show, who cares? Those are 5 people you could have inspired, that could have changed their outlook, that could change their mind, that could open their eyes. You never know. Maybe you're like, I'm wasting time posting on social media. Nobody's following me. My groups aren't getting bigger. Well, what about the people who do follow you? What about the people whose lives you do touch every day, that are maybe shy, that don't really let you know that they love your content, that haven't been liking it, or maybe they're just seeing it and it's impacting them? You just don't know it. And you know what's such a beautiful thought is I've heard multiple times that when you're on the other side, that they'll show you all the lives you touched unknowingly. And so I've heard like some of these near-death experiences, if you look into them, they're so inspiring and beautiful. But one of these ones that I was listening to, it was like they were showing him all the lives he touched and impacted through his love and through what he did in his life. And a lot of them, he said he had no idea. He had no idea that one little act of kindness propelled so many more, and how it actually had changed many people's lives. And he had no idea. So, this is another thing that we have to keep in mind, that every little action we take in love, even in self love, is healing this planet, is touching the lives of others. So, remember your impact. Remember what you're here to do. Don't give up on that. You so deserve to live your best life, and to remember you are so supported in it. You are so loved every inch of the way, every step of the journey. And your guides are going to make sure that you get to where you need to be if you trust, you know? So trust what you're doing is enough. Trust your soul and its path and its callings. Trust your intuition. When it says to do something, do it. Even if it makes you feel unsure, even if you feel like it's wrong, or maybe supposedly society might look at it in a different way or make you feel different. Maybe that's exactly what this world needs. Maybe different is beautiful. Maybe different is you, and you need to embrace that. You need to accept that and trust where your life leads, my friends, because it's always going to lead you right to where you need to be. If you listen, if you trust, you're going to be exactly where you need to be. So, my friends, that's all I have to share today. I really hope you enjoyed it. I know I kind of went all over the map with that one, but hopefully you enjoy my ramblings and some of my experiences. If you did, let me know. And I'm sending you all lots and lots of love. I also want to mention my new podcast for subscribers is going to be dropping here tomorrow, which is all about the chakras. I'm going to be starting with the root chakra, talking about that, how you can remove blocks, what those blocks could be, what the dominant functions are of each chakra. Those are all things I'm going to be discussing in this exclusive episode. So if you want to join me there, feel free to subscribe. I have the link below. I'm also going to be sharing some more exclusive episodes on there as well as time goes on. So I'd love to have you join my little community. Also, if you want to find more of my social media content, follow me on Instagram, I don't have Facebook anymore, but I do have Instagram as well as TikTok. So you can find me there as well. So I'll put those handles below and hopefully connect with you all soon. Take care, guys. Bye.